Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is United States Marine Corps Colonel Todd Manyx, who is the commanding officer of the Marine Corps Information Operations Center. Todd Manyx, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks, John. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be here and speak with you today.
I'd like to start our conversation, Todd, if I may, just to get your perspective on today's strategic climate.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you couldn't start off with a more complicated one if you tried. Strategic environment today is complicated and competitive. It's complicated in the fact that you got a number of powerful nations, influential nations who are maneuvering below the threshold of war in a way that makes many people uncomfortable. As a military, we are a kinetic organization, right? And if you use the DIME construct of diplomacy, information, military, and economy, like we're the M, right? We're the military, we're the hammer. If you think about international relations theory and deterrence and compellence, that's what we're good for, right? We bring a hammer that the diplomats can bring to negotiations, and we are really good at that as the Marine Corps. But we're in an environment where our adversaries have studied us for a couple decades, and they know what we bring to the table, and they have stated it is their goal to achieve their aims short of conflict. So through competition. So if you have a conflict organization and a competition mandate, how do you do that? And that's what makes this complicated right now, is like, how do you get after this environment? That's why I see the strategic environment overall, right? It's something new that the military has an appreciation for at an intellectual level, and it's trying to do the actual how do you get after competition part that's really hard right now.
Right. And the Marine Corps actually released right about a year ago, maybe just a little over a year ago, the new Marine Corps Doctrinal Pub 1-4, competing, which is a direct comment on everything that you were just talking about. Would you say that that's fair?
I would say that's absolutely fair. And it's exactly, I don't want to beat the Marine Corps drum, but I think the Commandant's, absolutely spot on in where he's trying to take the organization, the institution. But it is hard to do new things, right? We are victims of, you grow where your past informs your future, right? We're all products of the system we came in. If you come up in a kinetic organization, you're used to doing coin, well, that's what you know. If you guys switch back, listen, I came in the Marine Corps in 1985. I enlisted in 85. And at the time, the Cold War was a thing. The Soviet Union still existed. And, that lasted for a couple of decades, right? And it was a great forcing function and organizing principle for, the government and DOD as a whole. After September 11th, we went to a coin counterinsurgency model, and we've done that for 2 decades. We have to bring back the classics, if you will, of getting back to, competing with near peer adversaries. And the muscle memory doesn't necessarily reside in the institution to do that. You have an entire generations of officers enlisted who've gone through, come in, done their entire 20 years and have gotten out, and all they've done is counterinsurgency, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that's useful for the institutions, what the nation needed, but we need something different now. And, so that's what the Commandant's got force design going for, trying to get us back to our amphibious roots, get us back to being relevant and thinking those big picture thoughts of like, what, from a Marine Corps perspective, what do we do to stay relevant in, the whole DOD enterprise?
Right. So you are the commanding officer of the Marine Corps Information Operations Center. And to our audience, you'll hear us refer to this as interchangeably as the MCIOC. Could you give us the MCIOC 101? What is it? How long has it been around, et cetera?
Yeah, so the MCIOC was stood up as a command in the summer of 2009. I would say, ironically, that I would call him the godfather of the MCIOC was then Brigadier General Dunford. When he worked in plans, policy, and operations, he was instrumental in standing us up as a command. Just his vision of information, how that was going to develop as a requirement. And I tell the MCIOC story and kind of where we're at today. I sell it in a way that many might find, not controversial, but if you stand up a new organization, a new concept in the Marine Corps, I always describe MCIOC in 2009 as kind of come out of the primordial ooze, right? You come up, you're now a formation in the Marine Corps for something that people don't understand, right? So you get together some people who there's no formal MOS structure for IO things at the time. You get some funds and you get some commercial equipment off the shelf because there's no systems of record. And you try and pull together what is IO going to be for the Marine Corps. And you go out and you start trying to make yourself relevant, right? You sell yourself to the MU detachments, the expeditionary units, and we established detachments. And over time, right over that decade, there's some people who did a lot of hard work to bring this enterprise from nothing to where it is today. We spent a number of years doing global force management missions, deployments with the MU detachments we send out, and just making ourselves relevant and getting that out there for the Marine Corps and, showing them what IO was all about. In the Army, PsyOps and civil affairs, those are established career fields that have some legs under them. In the Marine Corps, it doesn't. So, those Marines and the civilians that did that for, a decade plus, my hat's off to them. They had a Herculean lift that they had to accomplish to get that done. And so that brings us to today, right? So MCIOC, what do we do? Well, Force Design 2025, forced some change. It stood up the MIGs, the MEF information groups, and those have become IOC, or Initial Operations Capable, within the last couple of years. And with their final operational, capable, their FOC coming up, in a couple of years down the road. But as the MIGs have stood up, we've divested missions to the MIGs, right? They took some structure from MCIOC, about 100 lines of structure, and that structure went to the MIGs to help give them something to build upon, right? Most of that's our MISO or our PsyOps structure that was given to them. That's structure, not people. Those people will come over time as they're trained and recruited into the Marine Corps. But they've taken on our MU deployments, right? They've got some structure. We gave them as much equipment as we could spare. Has been divested down to the MIGs to do MU detachments. So right now, the MCIOC is in a transition point. As I tell people, if you look at your iPhone in 2009 and your iPhone today, right, those are two totally different pieces of kit. Mm-hmm. What we're doing now is trying to envision MCIOC, as the iPhone of 2030. What's that going to look like? What do we need to do to remain relevant to the Marine Corps? The Commandant's made some bold choices with force design, right? He's divesting warfighting formations to reinvest in the institution. I, as MCIOC, don't get to exist as an institution just because I existed yesterday, right? If the Commandant's divesting warfighting formations to strengthen the institution, I have to bring value to it, right? I tell people I don't exist as a unicorn, so the Commandant can have a unicorn farm, right? I have to bring something to the Commandant to use. So we're working through what that means. And where we've kind of staked the future is, trying to operationalize information. And that's a loaded statement, right? Because it's kind of hard to explain what operationalize that means, right? So we see ourselves working at the Marine Forces level, the 3-star Marine components of the combatant commands. We have relationships, we're forming relationships with the other services, the Army's Information Warfare Command at Fort Bragg, the Joint MISO Web Ops Center, the GMWIC down in Tampa. We're working more, with Marine Forces Pacific, Marine Forces, Europe and Africa, Indo-PACOM, J39, We've had discussions with 16th Air Force on how we can, share different TTPs and like where we're going in different directions, and trying to establish more relationships with the Navy at the higher levels, operational and up, to like, how do we keep the Marine Corps in those conversations and get best of practices? How do we have, help get to a common terminology and a way of doing business? So, the MIGs, and I oversimplify this greatly, and the MIG commanders will probably push back on some of this, but, at the MEF level, they've got to worry about the tactical fight. And at the end of the day, this is all about authorities and permissions. No one can do anything in the information operations sphere without access to authorities and permissions. It's nice to have a process that's, you should have something that's process-based, not personality-based. The problem is this field is so small that it's frequently personality-based, in the beginning. Like, it's who do you know that can help you do something or appreciate what you do. So a lot of MCIOC right now is like, fostering those relationships. I have L&O relationships, liaison relationships with a number of those places, where I send Marines out for a couple weeks at a time, as often as I can, fiscally afford it. To have those sit in a room and people know who you are, who they are, how their processes work. A lot of times you come to find out when I send folks places that the other services don't appreciate or understand what the Marine Corps brings to the table as an institution, whether it's IO or anything else. And once they get their eyes open to it, they are really all in on the Marine Corps brand and want access to what we can do. So those have been some very valuable conversations we've been able to facilitate, and it's had some great impacts, I'd say, in real world operations over the past couple of years.
Yeah, fantastic, Todd. Could we unpack the MCIOC just a little bit more? Could you talk about the way you see the MCIOC's structure, the major components, major capabilities within your command?
Sure. It's a great question, because actually right now we are literally in the midst of reorganizing the command. We just re-snapped all the chalk lines in the building, and folks moved chairs literally last week. Traditionally, we've had kind of a Napoleonic structure, and an S1, S2, S3, with S3 kind of being the big dog owning most of the capabilities. But with this new organization, we've aligned more with the functions that we follow, and the capability areas we focus on. I have an influence section. That's my S9. I have a battlespace awareness section. It's my 2, but they focus on battlespace awareness. I've got an S5 that does planning for me, and that's where signature management and things of that nature are back in my S5. And then I've got I still have an S1, an admin section. I have ops, who kind of herds all the cats and manages my reach back support teams, my RSTs, who I have 3 of those. They're regionally aligned to COCOMs, and they maintain my day-to-day contact with the COCOMs and the MAR force for those respective areas. So in the influence section, I've got planners. They do influence ops, they do civ mil ops, they do PSYOP planning. I've talked about the reach back teams, who manage steady state access and placement with their with the MAR4s and their COCOM counterparts. The 2, or my battlespace awareness, is working through what does battlespace awareness look like? I mean, how do we do that process for information? There's been discussion: is it battlespace awareness? Is it situational awareness? And I can talk to you about the evolving terms that are used. But my publicly available information, social media personnel, they work in that section in the 2. The 5, it has the service level operational security element. We call it the most, but that's in my 5. And then I've got the miscellaneous things I do, right? Quantico, Crossroads of the Marine Corps. It's also the major educational institutions for officers, from basic school, expeditionary warfare school, command and staff. We support all those in their information operations curriculum, right? In the spring, command and staff, we actually teach a a class for command and staff. EWS, we host them regularly and participate in all their war games. So, but that's kind of how MCIOC's organized, as well as the rest of things that keep the wheels of the bus turn, right? Admin, logistics, got an S6 shop that does all the comm support that's required. So,
right,
that's kind of MCIOC in a nutshell.
Right. What's your total strength and numbers, and also do you have a number of civilian Marines?
Yeah.
As well?
Yeah, so total strength is around 200, smaller than you would normally expect for an 06 level command, but it's more about the authorities and where you have to operate for the level of command. So there's about 200 Marines and GS and GG, which are the intel equivalent of the GS Marines, and I also have a good number of contractors in the command as well. And like I tell people. My TO is much larger than my manning is. It's just no one's ever fully manned, and contractors are a way that we both manage risk of not having enough Marines and also, get the required specialists we need from some very specific language expertise that the Marine Corps just doesn't, have in its back pocket.
I was just asking those follow-up questions because from the feedback that I've gotten from Cognitive Crucible audience and others is that people are really interested in what the Marine Corps is doing, in that the Marine Corps is putting their money where their mouth is and making changes that are not just marginal. And so people are really interested to understand these kinds of details. Do you think we could turn the page and talk about talent management? Frequently, it's talent management bubbles up to the top as one of those major considerations that we have, not just as a military, not just as a government, but as a society. But let's stick with the military. Here recently, the Commandant just put out the Marine Corps Talent Management 2030 plan. We'll have a link to this in the show notes for those who are interested. But could you talk about, what's at the top of your inbox or what keeps you up at night when it comes to talent-related considerations?
Yeah, talent management is a core concern of mine. And, like I mentioned earlier, in the Army, civil affairs and PsyOps, which are two of the things we touch on the most at the MCIOC, those are established career fields in the Army. Those are where we go for training. The Marine Corps doesn't have that. My main concern is, training the Marines to do the job that they have to do. By and large, so I think this may have been covered in past podcasts, but right now, Deputy Commandant of Information, Lieutenant General Glavy, is working with the manpower people to stand up a new occupational field, the 1700 Information Occupational Field. We're waiting to see, how that finally rolls out. But right now it has that's where our space officers fall under this 1700 structure. Cyber officers fit there, and we're hoping to really gain some traction with this. Because I'll tell you right now, in my building, the only primary MOS I have is 0521 enlisted PsyOp Marine. That's it. Everyone else in my command is essentially filling a B billet, right? Something outside their primary MOS. I have some 8834s, some officers who've gone to Naval Postgraduate School and doing tech IO curriculum out there, doing their payback tours. I have some foreign area officers, regional affairs, FAOs and RAOs doing payback tours. And I've recently gained some staff NCOs doing the staff NCO equivalent, the FAS and the RAS MOS payback. But outside of that, everyone is basically playing a pickup game, right? They come, we give them some basic training, and they do 2 to 3 years at MCIOC, and then they go back to the fleet, to the primary MOS, to stay competitive in that MOS, right? So if imagine if you're sitting at a table, right? And the tabletop is where you need, right, from the floor to the tabletop, right? That tabletop is where you need to be to really be effective and interact with your inter-service peers. Well, we bring people in from the floor level, and they get about to the top of your chair seat, and then they leave, right? And they go back down. So that sine wave rarely gets up to the tabletop level. And if it is, it's people who've done like a repeat tour, right? So I have Marines who they come to the information enterprise, however they come to it. And they become absolutely fascinated with it. They absolutely love it. And they do multiple tours. I've got a couple officers that are doing their second tour at the MCIOC. And in between those tours, they've done other information related things, but they're not in their primary MOS. So it stymies their career longevity, right? Their ability to compete for command, promotion in their basic MOS, because they're not working in it. But I tell you what, they're some of the best information professionals the Marine Corps has. So I'm really fascinated and looking forward to the 1700 OC field coming on, so we can bring these dedicated people in who have told me, like, this is all I want to do, right? And some would rather retire and come back as contractors than, leave the field. So I'm waiting for this OC field to come on so I can bring these Marines over, because they're the leadership I need, right, to do this going forward in the future. So yeah, so talent management, like how do we train above a basic level to develop the expertise the Marine Corps needs, to have really good conversations. Listen, MCIOC, you mentioned, the manning. I have a number of GSs. I have my chief of staff is a GS 15, and my deputies in the principal staff sections are GS 14s. Almost without exception, the individuals in those positions have been in MCIOC since it became a command in 2009, right? Absolute, long ball hitters in this field. But on the active side, where do I grow up, experience and background to replace them at some point, right? There's going to come a transition time when those, ladies and gentlemen are going to retire. And I'm concerned about the bench that backfills them. How do I develop that expertise, both for the service and for the longevity of the institution? We have to get there. So General Glavy and his folks, the maneuver division led by, Colonel Jordan Walzer, like, they're moving out and have been working this for a long period of time. And we're hopeful it comes off here in the next few months and we can start moving people in. I think long-term that gets to the professionalization, the talent management of the force, is now there's an MOS that they can go to, grow up in, do repeated tours in, and kind of raise the level of the game for everyone involved from a talent management perspective.
Right. Well, so the U.S. military is competing with the private sector for top talent, and I think going, one of the initiatives, or maybe going to the heart of the Commandant's talent management 2030 strategy, is to reconfigure the force for more longevity and technical expertise needed in today's great power competitions.
So one of his goals is to mature the force. Here's part of the concept of maturing the force is, if you consider, China has been designated a pacing threat. So if you consider that, we're the stand-in force, those Marines in Okinawa and in Western Pacific, have to operate for them. There are times, and I'll take you back, if you have mental model, think of, World War II and the island hopping campaigns, right? You can envision scenarios where small forces led by, NCOs or staff NCOs are operating alone and unafraid, and you need to, those individuals have to be trusted to have the experience and competence and faith in themselves to, like, make decisions without an officer present, right? What do you do when you're by yourself? And you need an older, more mature force, with some experience under them to execute like that. And when I look at this from an IO perspective, right, from MCIOC, I just see it like there are folks who they've told me this is what they want to do. They're not interested in command. And I've worked with Marines who've, like, gone to cyber, and some of these other, high demand, low density, newer MOSs, who that's all they want to do. That's all they want to do. It's like, okay, why would we maintain an industrial age process, manpower system that forces out talent who not interested in command, absolutely willing to, advance so far in the institution, but as long as they can keep doing what they love, they want to do that. There has to be a seat at the table for them. And I think that's probably part of what the Commandant's trying to get after with the new talent management, initiative that he's put out. It's just that, right?
Yeah.
Have a wide tent for everybody who wants to serve. There's a place for you in the institution.
Right. This is a bit of a sidebar, but to that last point you were making, I recall a guy that I knew when I was on active duty. He did an exchange tour with the British Royal Marines, and he was telling me that, yeah, just what you were saying. There were men in the British Royal Marines, like 60-year-old corporals. It's like, why would you have a 60-year-old guy who's a corporal? Well, he's a gunner. That's what he does. That's what he loves. And he doesn't want to do anything else. And he's the best at it. So maybe it's kind of taking a page from that kind of a talent management strategy.
Yeah, listen. When I was a company commander at 2nd Rail Battalion in the late 90s, my operations chief was a master sergeant who was absolutely brilliant. Spoke Russian, spoke Chinese at a 3-3 level. He had 2 or 3 other different hard languages that he spoke, and was a master trainer. And all he wanted to do was work with and train Marines. He turned down promotion to master gunnery sergeant because that would have put him in more of a staff position, and he never get a chance to train Marines again. And he retired as a master sergeant because that's what he loved to do. And I aided that for as long as I could. It's like, if that's what you want to do, that's what you're going to do. Let's make you effective. So
right, yeah. So if we could turn the page, so one of the themes that comes up over and over again in this discussion forum, Todd, is in order to operate effectively in the information environment, we have to partner and collaborate. Either do it better than what we've been doing, or continue doing it more. So what are the agencies external to the MCIOC or even the Marine Corps that you find yourself communicating and partnering with the most? And then, as a kind of a follow-up question to that, could you also talk a little bit about the places where you'd like to develop better relationships, or further deepen your relationships with other places?
Sure. I like to develop and deepen relationships with everyone.
Sure. Yeah.
I just throw a blanket saying
it's a team sport.
I frequently, when I go on office calls and I go on the road, it's like I tell everyone, it's like I say no to nothing. That's my OPSO's job, right? He meters my appetite. I'll commit to everything, and he'll tell me when I'm out of rounds and have no one else to give. But so at an institutional level, like, who do we reach out to? We work with our sister services, the Army Information Warfare Center at Bragg, the JMWIC, the Joint Missile Web Ops Center down at Tampa. We're working on the 16th Air Force and developing that relationship, as well as the Navy, the NIWC, the Naval Information Warfare Command. Working those relationships, trying to develop and foster and grow them. I have an LNO with the GAC, the State Department's Global Engagement Center, that we try to work on. We have some other interagency partnerships that we're trying to develop as well that are very nascent right now. And so that's within the U.S., right? The U.S. enterprise is we're trying to get out that 3-star level up and out across all comers. Now, in addition to that, allies and partners, right? Very important. So the MCIOC, every year we run 2 information warfare exercises. This spring, time 1 is tended to be a U.S. only event. Last spring, we went out to Marine Forces Pacific in Hawaii and did a war game with them to try and help them understand what OIE looks like at the operational level. And we're looking to replicate that again, do that again in 2022 as well, do that in the springtime again, and maybe grow that a little bit. In the fall, what I consider our flagship event is a 2-week exercise we do at Quantico. And, COVID has, goes without saying, it's throwing a wrench in the works. In 2020, we had canceled the whole exercise, couldn't do it. This year we did do it, had to scale it back a little bit because, some of the nations couldn't support. But what it is in 2 weeks is in the fall, we come together. And this year we had the Netherlands came again. They brought the Belgians with them. We had Canada, the UK, the Royal Marines came. We had a couple officers from Singapore. We had a observer come from the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force as we did this. And what we have is kind of a two-track system. We have a tactical lane training scenario that we do, where they spend a week doing classwork, and then they go out to the train areas in Quantico to some of the train centers that we have, some of the mock villages. We hire role players to come in. Actually, our role players all speak Tagalog. So the teams go out and they go on patrol through the city. They've got objectives they have to do along the way. They have to work with an interpreter to speak to the populace. And, you know, we put them through their paces on meeting these different metrics, right, as they go through IWX. And they do that for about 4 or 5 days on the back end on the tactical lane train side. In parallel to that, over at Mainside this year, we get folks together in a big room for a map exercise. And this is where the value of, you know, they spend 3 or 4 days talking about the scenario, planning actions, actions, reactions, counteractions. They spend about 3 or 4 days planning, and then we go into 3 or 4 days of execution of doing this war game based off a scenario we have. Rand, the Rand Corporation has helped us with the rule set for this. They've actually published a book on the rules and how we did IWX this year. That's really gained some traction. We've gotten a lot of phone calls from people who've read it, like, how do we replicate and grow this? But I tell you, the value of bringing those partner nations in is just absolutely eye-opening, in that, right, you quickly realize the U.S. is not the only player in the game. The other nations have strengths and experiences we lack. And it's interesting to work through how they do their tactics and, you know, techniques and procedures, or TTPs. You know, one of the most interesting discussions we had, I think, was with, I know that when Afghanistan was still going on, the Dutch would come and actually use IWX as their final certification exercise before deploying downrange, just to validate their training and their TTPs and what they were going to do. So, yeah, for us, IWX is a big part of our outreach, and one of the things we're trying to grow. I said before, MAR4 PAC, you know, we're actually looking to maybe take this forward over the next year or two, but we think there's probably value in being able to do it at MAR4 PAC, do it in Hawaii, a little bit closer to to where the stand-in force lives, and you know, bring these countries together to practice doing tactical and operational level OIE, you know, together in a place that matters. So, yeah. So, you know, where are we looking to go? Who do we interact with? We try to interact with everyone. My personnel checkbook doesn't always support that, but it doesn't mean we don't try. And yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite a scope of operations there in collaboration. You mentioned that book by Rand. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. I have not read it yet, but it did come across my radar. I believe I didn't realize that the Marine Corps was one of the touch points for that IO gaming book or exercise.
Oh yeah, that was totally based off of the MCIOC's war game. I mean,
Is that right?
We spent some money to coordinate with Rand to help us develop the rule set and how do you do a larger scaled game like that. So it took a lot of work. There are some individuals who have focused their entire time just on developing the IWX for us, both in-house and other places. When you talk about information operations, right, or information or influence, like, people like to talk about whole of government, and that's a useful phrase, but to really be effective, I think you need more of a whole of nation enterprise, right? It's not just the government, you know, for influence and informing, like, you know, there's a civilian, you know, enterprise, like there's a business aspect to this. Like, everyone needs to be aware of what's going on. In the same fashion, like, the United States is not doing this alone, you know, partners and allies. Like, there are other countries who are as invested, if not more, There are countries that live a lot closer to Russia than we do. Countries that live a lot closer to China than we do. Like they have skin in this game as well. And it only benefits us to work with them and to understand what they bring to the table and how we can contribute and leverage each other's strengths. Even internal to the U.S. Military, there are, each of the services brings something unique to the table. And when I say this, some people, might take offense, but the Marine Corps and the Army have a certain soft power skill set of like walking the earth, talking to people, right? PSYOP, civil affairs, that the Navy and the Air Force haven't really had to invest in because they do different things, right? I would say that the Air Force, the Navy are almost without peer for the technical expertise that they've developed in their lanes. But so it's like, how do we, and this is part of like exploring, like, how do we develop partnerships and, leverage the expertise at 16th Air Force and the NIWC, right? We each bring something to the table that the other one lacks. So how can we give them experience with PSYOPs or MISO that the Navy doesn't grow in-house, like the Air Force doesn't grow in-house? How can we help them with that part of the equation that they're missing? So that's one of the things we're trying to develop and suss out as we talk to people.
Todd, you've been very generous with your time. Appreciate it. I'd like to wrap up. This is kind of like the PME component. Do you have any kind of like a recommended book that our audience might not have heard of, or that you could recommend that's on your nightstand of?
Sure. I can give you a number, right? First off, we talked about RAND. So anything, Chris Paul's working on is money. Listen, Peter Singer, I think, has probably mentioned everybody that talks to you on the podcast, right? Whether you're talking Ghost Fleet and technology, or you're talking like war on social media, Peter Singer's, probably at the forefront. I recently just read a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini, I believe is how you pronounce his name. Fascinating book. It first came out in 1984. He just came out, I think, the 4th edition. I literally just bought the hardback a couple months ago and read it in a few days. Fascinating read on how people are influenced. So, whether it's marketing or all those, people calling you about your extended car warranty. I mean, he gives you like all the psychology on that, and it's updated. So it's got current events in there as well. It's really fascinating to read. I've got a book on my nightstand called Nudge by Richard Thaler, who's Nobel Prize in economics. Talks about how people make decisions, which for me gets back to like influence and how do you get into people's decision cycle. And then there's a gentleman who's now deceased named Barton Whaley, who wrote a book called Practice to Deceive. He actually wrote a number of books. He was considered the dean of deception when he was alive. He's got one book called Strategium that is pretty well known, but if you were to go find that book, it costs over $100 to buy. Practice to Deceive came out a couple years ago. It was published posthumously, but it's much more accessible. So yeah, I got 3 or 4 books that are always being read. It's a constant struggle to get to all the PME I want, but there you go.
Yeah, for sure. Well, being a lifelong learner, I think is part of the agenda for this great power struggle that we're in right now. And thanks for all those suggestions. And with that, Colonel Todd Manyx, thank you so much for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.